When you hear the word hacker, what pops into your head? Probably some person in a dark room, right? Furiously typing away as green text just scrolls and scrolls down a black screen. But the reality? It's a lot less like a movie and a whole lot more methodical. Today, we're going to pull back that curtain and really understand the structured, almost scientific process that goes into a digital attack. This is the anatomy of ethical hacking. And to kick things off, let's just look at this classic piece of strategy. Now, obviously, Sun Tzu wasn't thinking about cybersecurity, but this ancient wisdom, it is the absolute bedrock of modern digital defense. See, to protect a system, you have to understand how an attacker thinks, how they plan their moves, and what tools they're using. It's all just a big battle of knowledge and preparation. So, what is a hacker, really? Before we can get into the how of an attack, we've got to understand the who and the why. A hacker, at their core, is just someone who explores ways to get past defenses and take advantage of weaknesses in a computer system or network. But their motivations? Oh man, their motivations can be wildly different. And that brings us to a really crucial distinction. On one side, you have white hat hackers, or ethical hackers. These are the good guys. They're the security pros who get hired to find vulnerabilities before the bad guys can. And then, on the other side, you've got the black hat hackers. They're the ones with malicious intent. They want to steal data, cause chaos, or demand a ransom. They're using the exact same skills, just for completely opposite reasons. The formal process that these white hats use is called a penetration test, or just pen test for short. Think of it as the totally controlled, simulated attack against a system. The whole point is to find those weak spots and report them so they can get fixed, basically beating the black hats to the punch. So let's break down exactly what that structured process actually looks like. Okay, so every single attack, doesn't matter if it's real or a simulation, starts in the exact same place: reconnaissance. This is the intelligence gathering phase. I mean, the more an attacker knows about their target, the higher their chance of success. It's all about mapping out the digital landscape before you make a single move. Now, here's the thing that's crucial to understand. A ton of this information can be learned without ever directly touching the target's network. This is what we call passive reconnaissance, or OSINT, which stands for Open Source Intelligence. It's all about gathering info from public sources: social media, company websites, public records. You would be absolutely shocked at what's just out there for anyone to find. A really powerful OSINT technique is using something called Google dorking. And note, this is not your average everyday search. By using these advanced operators, you can tell Google to find very specific things. For example, a search like filetype.pdf confidential could potentially dig up sensitive documents that a company just accidentally left exposed to the entire world. It's a simple but an incredibly effective way to find info that was never, ever meant to be public. So Google is awesome for finding documents and web pages, right? But what if an attacker is looking for something more specific? What if they want to find actual devices that are connected to the internet, like servers or webcams or even industrial control systems? Well, for that, hackers turn to specialized search engines like Shodan. The best way to think of it is like Google, but for the Internet of Things. It is constantly scanning the internet and cataloging every device it can find, from your home router and security cameras all the way up to the systems that control power plants. It gives an attacker a direct look at the hardware that's connected to a network. Okay, once that passive phase is done, it's time to get a little more hands-on. This is active reconnaissance. Now, the hacker starts directly probing the target's network using tools like Nmap. This is kind of like walking down a street and methodically checking every single door and window on a building to see which ones might be unlocked. Nmap sends out these little probes to see which digital ports, think of them as numbered doors into a system, are open and what services are listening on them. So at this point, an attacker has collected a ton of information: public documents, connected devices, a list of open ports, and all the services that are running. The next phase is vulnerability analysis. This is where all that raw data gets sifted through to find an actual exploitable weakness, a real crack in the armor. And this is the key question for any attacker, right? It's one thing to know that, say, a server is running a specific version of web software on port 80. It's a whole other thing to know if that specific version has a flaw that you can use to break in. So, how do you bridge that gap? The answer lies in finding a vulnerability. And a vulnerability is just any kind of weakness. It could be a mistake in the software's code,
a deep flaw in the system's design, or honestly, even something as simple as a misconfiguration, like leaving a default password unchanged. So, to keep track of all these flaws, the security community uses a system called CVE, which stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. Think of it like a massive universal catalog of every publicly known security weakness out there. Each vulnerability gets its own unique ID, like CVE 2024 something, which makes it super easy for everyone to refer to the exact same issue. And the scale of this thing is, well, it's staggering. The CVE database currently lists around 300,000 unique cataloged vulnerabilities. That's 300,000 known cracks that attackers could potentially take advantage of if they aren't patched. This is the library an attacker goes to once they know what software a target is running. So, after finding a target, identifying its services, and matching them up to a known vulnerability, an attacker reaches the moment of truth. Exploitation. This is where they actively use that vulnerability to get access. And the tool they use for this is called an exploit. So, if a vulnerability is like a cracked window, the exploit is the specially designed crowbar that's used to pry it open. It's that piece of code or that sequence of commands that triggers the flaw in the software and forces it to do something it was never meant to do, like, giving the attacker control. Now, building these exploits by hand is really complex, so hackers often use powerful tools to automate the whole process. And the most famous one is the Metasploit framework. It really is like a Swiss Army knife for exploitation. It's got this huge database of thousands of pre-built exploits for all sorts of vulnerabilities, all just ready to be aimed and fired. Using a tool like Metasploit boils this whole process down into 3 main steps. First, you pick the specific exploit that matches your target's vulnerability. Second, you configure the payload. That's the code you want to run after the exploit works. And then finally, you launch the attack. It's just a systematic process of matching the right key to the right lock. A common goal for that payload is to set up a shell, which basically gives the attacker command line control. It's almost like having a direct text-based hotline to the victim's computer. And there are 2 main ways to do this. A bind shell forces the victim's machine to open a port and just listen for the attacker to connect. But a reverse shell, which is often a lot stealthier, makes the victim's machine connect back out to a listening attacker. Both get you to the same place, a direct line into the compromised system. But getting access isn't the end of the story. No way. It's just the beginning. The final phase is post-exploitation, and this covers everything an attacker does once they have that initial foothold inside the network. Their job now is to solidify their control and actually achieve their ultimate goal. Once they're inside, the attacker has a brand new to-do list. First, they need to escalate their privileges to get more power. Then they want to move laterally to compromise other machines on the network, kind of like a burglar, moving from room to room. They need to establish persistence so they can survive a reboot. And the final goal is often data exfiltration, stealing the information they came for in the first place. And this is so crucial. The initial exploit might only give an attacker access as a low-level user with very limited permissions. That's not very useful. So the very first thing they're going to try to do is escalate their privileges. They'll look for another flaw inside the system that lets them become the all-powerful administrator or root user, giving them total and complete control. And that really brings us to our final thought. We've just walked through the methodical, structured phases of an attack, from reconnaissance and scanning, all the way to exploitation and then what happens after. This is the exact playbook that ethical hackers use to find and fix security flaws, which leaves us with a question to think about. If they were to run this playbook on your network, what do you think they might find?